Hello and welcome to the Banker's May Databank video. I'm David Robinson, the online editor at The Banker, and today we're going to look at Ecuador, following the surprise election of Guillermo Lasso as the country's new president and what it could mean for the country's banks. With me to discuss this is Marie Kemplay, the investment banking and capital markets editor at The Banker. Marie, can you briefly outline what's just happened in Ecuador?
So, as you say, David, there's been a bit of a surprise result in the second round of its presidential election, which took place on the 11th of April. And as you say, Guillermo Lasso, a businessman and former banker, actually took a victory there. You know, he won 52.3% of the vote, which, not a landslide, clearly, but nonetheless a surprise result because his left-wing rival, Andre Arroz, was widely expected to win that election result, and indeed he'd won the first round result. And as I say, while not a kind of landslide victory, it's still pretty well. Any presidential election result is clearly significant, but this is particularly significant because it marks a rejection of the kind of left-wing politics which have dominated the country, I think it's fair to say, for more than a decade now. And hopefully, and there is a lot of hope from a lot of people, that's going to mark something of a pivot in a different direction. There's a perception that the kind of approach to running the government and the economy, etc., for the last kind of few years has created some kind of economic problems which need to be dealt with now.
So Mr. Lasso's only just won. What is he proposing to do?
He really ran on a ticket of economic competence. As I mentioned a moment ago, there's been a bit of some economic difficulties that, in recent years. You know, there's quite a big deficit that's developed. Last year, the country's GDP shrank by 8%. It was also forced to go to the IMF for a 6.5 billion financing package, and that came off the back a few weeks earlier of a restructuring of $17.4 billion worth of government debt. So a big set of things that need to be dealt with there. And to make that even worse, you know, there was COVID-19 happened, and I think it's fair to say the country has struggled, or the politicians and the government have kind of struggled to get a grip on that. I think it's true that there have been 5 different health ministers in Ecuador since the outbreak of COVID-19. And there's also Financial Times analysis which suggests that Ecuador's excess death rate, which is the number of deaths above that you would expect to see, has been the second worst during the pandemic out of any country in the world. So yeah, quite a set of problems that need to be addressed there. But he's come in and said, you know, he's got quite a lot of stretching targets that he's set himself in terms of the pandemic. I think he said he wants to inoculate half the population within his first 100 days in government, and I obviously don't have the figures or information to hand to say whether that's a realistic target, but it's obviously an ambitious one. So that's one thing. And then on the economy, he's said that he wants to balance the budget within the next 4 years. I mentioned earlier there's quite a big deficit. So again, another really ambitious aim. In addition to that, he wants to attract more foreign investment, wants to create 2 million new jobs, wants to set up a fund to stimulate entrepreneurship, and also tax cuts for small businesses, and plenty of other things. So a big to-do list there. And if he can achieve even some of that, I think it's fair to say, you know, there will be quite a strong result will have been achieved there.
Big changes. What do all these changes mean for Ecuador's banks?
They have, it's fair to say, really struggled along with everyone else in the last couple of years. You know, and I think it's testament to the optimism and hope that there is, that off the back of the election result, government bond prices for Ecuadorian sovereign debt really soared. You know, so there is a lot of optimism he's going to change things. The banks desperately need things to change. You know, I think if we take Financiero Pichincha, for instance, which is Ecuador's largest bank by capital and assets, it saw its pre-tax profits slump from $207.34 million in 2019 to just $61.52 million in 2020. So it's really been hit hard by that economic shock. And, you know, a similar story at its other banks. Its second largest bank, Banco del Pacifico, and third largest bank, Banco Guayaquil, their return on equity, which, as you know, is a key measure of profitability, fell from actually quite a respectable level of 13.07% and 6.03% respectively to just 3.78% and 6.22% respectively. So they have really been hit hard. And the Association of Private Banks for Ecuador, a kind of trade body for the country's banks, they've said that slump wasn't just the largest banks, that's really been felt across everybody. So the country's smallest banks, they suggest they've had a revenue reduction of 125% between 2019 and 2020, which is obviously huge. I guess to get really back to basics, if the economy doesn't pick up, they're not really going to see any difference in these kind of results, right? There's a lot of concern around souring loans because people are struggling economically, not able to pay off their loans, and the banks themselves just aren't able to be particularly active and do a lot of business in the current climate where the pandemic is really has still quite a strong hold on the country. So yeah, a lot of fingers crossed, I'd say, by a lot of people that he is going to be able to deliver on this ambitious list of things that he's set out for himself.
Well, Marie, thank you. Perhaps we can return to look at Ecuador in a year or so and see how Mr. Lasso has performed. Thank you very much.